Picture this. It's 6 p.m. on a Tuesday in a typical American suburb. You pull into the driveway, the garage door rumbles shut, and then nothing. No one is shouting for help with Common Core math. No one is asking what's for dinner or complaining that you left a towel on the floor. You walk inside, the air still smells like the coffee you brewed this morning, and the only sound is the low hum of the fridge and the soft blue glow of the TV in the living room. For a lot of people, that silence sounds like a nightmare. But for a Gen X man, it sounds like a hard-earned victory. You aren't alone in that quiet house either. In 1970, only about 7% of American men in their prime had never been married. Fast forward to today, and that number has skyrocketed to nearly 30%. 1 in 3. We are witnessing the rise of the solo Gen X male, a demographic that isn't just between relationships, but is actively redefining what it means to live a good life on your own terms. We've traded the chaos of the traditional family unit for the absolute autonomy of our own space. But here's the question we rarely ask ourselves while we're enjoying that peace. Is this quiet house a choice you're making now because you love the freedom? Or is it a skill you were forced to master back when you were 10 years old, standing on a porch with a key around your neck? Gen X was the least parented generation in American history. We didn't have play dates or helicopter parents tracking our every move via GPS. We had a brass key on a shoelace around our neck and a box of Kraft mac and cheese. When you walked into that empty house after school in 1985, you didn't feel lonely. You felt like the king of the castle. You had 3 hours of total autonomy before anyone else walked through that door. That upbringing turned us into the most hyper-independent demographic in history. It wasn't just a personality trait, it was a survival mechanism. Research actually shows that this reduced adult supervision accelerated our problem-solving skills. We became the MacGyvers of our own lives, learning how to fix a broken bike chain or a bad mood with whatever was lying around in the kitchen drawer. There's a psychological concept by Donald Winnicott called the capacity to be alone, and he argued it's one of the most important signs of emotional maturity. Most of us mastered that by the time we were in 6th grade. But here's the thing about survival skills. They are designed for survival, not necessarily for thriving. What starts as a strength, this legendary ability to handle everything yourself, can slowly morph into what psychologists call a functional freeze. It's a state where you're highly productive, you pay your bills on time, and you're totally self-sufficient, but you've quietly built a wall so thick that nothing and no one can get through. You don't ask for help because, in your mental map of the world, there was never anyone there to ask. You've successfully recreated that 1980s empty house in your 50s. It's quiet, it's controlled, and you're the boss. But the stakes are different now. The independence that made you a resilient kid is the same thing that can turn you into a ghost in your own life. Because what happens when the very skill that saved you at 12 years old starts to kill you at 52? If you've gone through a divorce or a major breakup in the last few years, you probably realize something pretty quickly. You didn't just lose a partner, you lost your entire social operating system. In many American households, the wife often acts as the social secretary. She's the one who tracks the birthdays, organizes the weekend BBQs, and keeps the connection alive with the other couples. When she's gone, the calendar doesn't just get thinner, it goes completely blank. You find yourself sitting in that quiet house, realizing that your phone hasn't buzzed with a social invite in 3 weeks. This is what researchers call the friendship recession, and it's hitting Gen X men harder than anyone. In 1990, only about 3% of American men said they had no close friends. Today, that number has jumped to 15%. That's a five-fold increase in guys who literally have no one to call when things go sideways. Part of the problem is how we build relationships. Women tend to connect face to face. They talk, they share, they process. Men, we connect shoulder to shoulder. We bond while we're doing something, fixing a deck, watching the game, or standing over a grill. But when you're living solo, there's no one on the other shoulder. Your old friends are like those specialized tools sitting in the back of your garage. The ones you haven't touched in years. You know they're there, you know they still work, but you've forgotten how to use them. And here's the grim reality. For a divorced man, this isolation isn't just boring, it's dangerous. Statistics show that divorced men are significantly more likely to face a mental health crisis, with some data suggesting a suicide risk nearly 5 times higher than their married peers. It's a heavy price to pay for peace. Living alone in your 50s isn't just a lifestyle choice. For your body, it's the physiological equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That sounds like a clickbait headline, but the data is brutal. Loneliness is a physical toxin. When you spend years in that functional freeze we talked about, your cortisol levels stay spiked. Your heart never quite gets the signal to relax. A major study in psychiatry research found that for men, chronic isolation literally doubles the risk of premature death. It's linked to higher rates of heart disease and even cancer. Then there's the drift. This is how your life narrows when no one is watching. It happens gradually, like a slow leak in a truck tire. You start skipping the gym because, hey, who cares? Dinner goes from a balanced meal to a bowl of cereal over the sink at 9 p.m. You stop wearing the nice shirts. You let the house maintenance slide. Without another human being to act as a mirror, you lose the calibration that keeps you sharp and disciplined. And let's be real about the logistical nightmare of solo aging in America. I call it the colonoscopy test. In your 50s, the doctor tells you it's time for that routine check. But here's the catch. The clinic won't let you Uber home. They require a responsible adult to sign you out and drive you. If you've spent the last 5 years being a total lone wolf, who's on your emergency contact list? That's the moment the quiet house feels less like a fortress and more like a cage. You realize that total independence is a luxury that expires the moment you actually need a hand. So what's the fix? Does avoiding the health tax mean you have to rush out and get remarried just to have an emergency contact? For most Gen X men, the thought of someone moving their collection of decorative throw pillows onto your leather sofa, or questioning why you have a stack of vintage car magazines in the bathroom, is enough to make you break out in hives. We've spent decades perfecting our space. We don't want a roommate, even if that roommate is the love of our life. This is where a growing number of Americans are finding a middle ground called living apart together, or LAT. It's a committed relationship where you share your life, your weekends, and your secrets, but you keep your own zip code. It's the ultimate Gen X hack. You get the safety net, someone who will actually drive you home from that colonoscopy without sacrificing the quiet house that keeps you sane. Data shows that LAT relationships are surging among the over 50 crowd in the US because it honors that latchkey instinct for autonomy while killing the isolation that actually shortens your life. It's about being intentional. But maybe you're not looking for a partner. Maybe you just need to rebuild your third place. Back in the day, our dads had the VFW hall, the local dive bar, or the bowling league. Today we have Netflix and a phone that only rings for spam calls. We have to reinvent the third place around things that actually interest us. It doesn't have to be a major commitment. I call it the low-friction anchor. Think of it like a First Friday fire pit or a standing Saturday morning meetup at the local hardware store's coffee station. It's a recurring event that requires zero RSVPs and zero drama. You show up, you talk shop for an hour, and you go back to your sanctuary. It's about building a social muscle that hasn't been used in years, proving to yourself that you can be part of the world without letting the world take over your living room. You're not changing your nature, you're just upgrading your operating system to handle the long haul. Look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you to join a local pickleball league or sign up for some men's vulnerability workshop. That's not you. And honestly, it's not me either. But I am going to ask you to do something much harder. Check the wire. In our generation, friendships don't usually end with a big dramatic blowout. We don't have breakups with our buddies. Instead, the signal just fades. One year, you're hitting the driving range every other weekend. The next year, you're trading a few texts about the Super Bowl, and then suddenly 3 or 4 years have passed and you realize the wire went dead. You tell yourself it would be awkward to reach out now. You think, he's probably busy with his own life, or if he wanted to talk, he'd call me. But here's the reality of the American middle-aged man. There is a high probability that your old friend is sitting in a house just as quiet as yours, staring at the same game on TV, feeling that exact same friendship recession. He's not avoiding you. He's just stuck in his own version of that functional freeze. You've already mastered the hardest part. You know how to be alone without losing your mind. You've got the independence down to a science. Now you just need to make sure that independence doesn't become a prison. Your challenge is simple. Pick one person, not a group, not a party. Just one guy you haven't talked to in way too long. Send a text, or, if you're feeling bold, actually dial the number. No agenda. No, I need a favor. Just, hey, I was thinking about that road trip we took back in the day. Hope you're doing well. That's it. That's the whole move. You've spent decades being the guy who can handle anything by himself. Now prove you're strong enough to pick up the phone. Check the wire before the silence becomes permanent.